Okay, well, I am originally from Atlanta. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Atlanta is the largest city in the United States to have a black mayor for 50 years.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode.
Is the capital of the South. It has the busiest airport in the world. Grew up here. My family owned a business in defense contracting for about 20 years. I've worked in all kinds of forms of corporate America in managing contracts and distribution. I actually was a shipping manager for Amazon.com for a while, and Pepsi Cola. I don't know how big Pepsi is in Italy, but of course, Atlanta is the home of Coca-Cola. So basically, I'm from Atlanta, enjoyed it, have really enjoyed growing up. It is a very vibrant city. Of course, it is the city at the birthplace of Dr. Martin Luther King and the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. Um, so I just like to talk about, when I talk about myself, I talk about my experiences, obviously, in America, in studying at university, political science and the world, and just trying to incorporate that into my podcast to show people that nothing is really new. Things have always happened. It's just how they're framed and how they're given to the masses in terms of helping them. Well, I shouldn't say help. I should say to direct their thoughts and their movements. So that's about me, and a little political, sometimes controversial, but I do pretty well versed in American history, somewhat Western in the Western Hemisphere, and of course the continent of Africa.
That's fantastic. That's absolutely interesting. As long as it is important for us in the right way, we talk about it because we need to put ourselves first. That is actually what I want to say there. So, one thing I would like to know from you is that in this podcast, we try to pay attention to where we are coming from, our origin. We just do this intentionally. Can you tell me something about when you were still young? I mean, you were still like 12, 14. Tell me something what do you see around you in those years?
Okay, well, let me take you to, I'll take you further back than that. I am rare in the sense I am a third generation college graduate. Morehouse College, which is also the college for Dr. Martin Luther King. My grandfather graduated from Morehouse in 1916. The sister college to it is called Spelman, which my grandparents graduated from, my parents, aunts, and uncles. Why I think it's important when we're talking about our history is my grandfather had a PhD in education, and he was unfortunately the victim of an assassination in 1939 because he attempted to use a black construction company and purchase land from black landowners in order to build the school. He was killed in front of my mother and her two brothers. My grandmother moved to another town in Georgia where she raised all three of them. All three uh, graduated from college. My father's a college graduate from Morehouse as well. His family owned a business, a dry cleaners and a grocery store in Birmingham, Alabama, in the 1930s and 40s. And the state was not appreciative of the success of the black community in Birmingham. They decided to build a road and destroyed the community and the businesses there. My parents subsequently moved to Atlanta, where my experience came because I was born in the 60s during the civil rights struggle. So when I got to the 70s and integration occurred in the United States, the things I saw was the changing of the guard, so to speak, publicly, in that there were no more segregated signs and instruments of segregation that were visible to the eye. They moved more into the background where they were barriers that were set up that you couldn't see, but you were locked out of certain types of employment, business ownership, political growth. So as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old, That's what I saw. And coming into my teenage years, the late 70s is when things really started to change. As I mentioned, Atlanta is the largest city in the United States, has 6 million people, and it has had a black mayor for 50 years. So it's a very prosperous city. Um, and our experience was such that we were able to open a business here, be successful here for a very long time. Um, but I guess to answer your more pertinent question is, in the 1970s, you saw a lot of struggle and change in the changing of gods and the accepting of the fact that Black people, and maybe even so back then were known as Negroes, were no longer going to be accepting of their position in American society. And Atlanta was a fertile ground for breaking those molds and chains of oppression.
Thank you so much for that. Now, is there anything that could have make Atlanta to stand out in terms of a rebellion to this system of oppression that wanted to keep oppression as a norm? So a city like Atlanta, a lot of individuals came out there to shape the future. Is there anything that could have led to that? I mean, can you give us a little background as to why there were so many prominent people from that city who spoke out against the oppression of the state?
Yeah, well, basically in the South, obviously was segregated. The airport came to Atlanta in the late 40s. And you had to be very progressive to want that airport because that meant you brought in new people and different ideas. There were a lot of the southern cities that had no interest in that. The leadership in Atlanta at that time was accepting and brought the airport in. And of course, it turned Atlanta into a magnet for the South and people to relocate to Atlanta. And the mayors who were white in the late 50s and 60s were accepting of the change. That's what made Atlanta fertile for the birth of the civil rights movement. All the major organizations were in Atlanta, and they emanated from Atlanta, and they led the change in the country. And what's always interesting in political science is understanding it's not about yelling and screaming to change anything. It's about the ability to formulate public policy. And in Atlanta was the big place where they had the movement for registering to vote and electing Black officials who in turn employed Black people and allowed Black people to get government contracts to start to build private businesses outside of the government. And I think that's what makes Atlanta unique to all the other major cities in the country, is that per capita, the Black people in Atlanta had the largest income per capita in the country. They own the most businesses of any city in the country. And people don't understand, the United States has 40 million people out of 340. And Atlanta, again, as I was saying to you, you're talking about probably about 1.8 million Black people, is the reason why it has always been the prominent city and leading the ending of apartheid, which would be American apartheid, which would be Jim Crow, segregation, and secret laws and societies that were designed to oppress Black people.
All right, thank you so much for that. This is a very deep history that continues to haunt the United States, actually. Because recently, looking at what happened in Buffalo, some people don't understand, might think that this is a kind of a random act. But actually, it's not random at all. It's something that has been going on for a very long time. So one would imagine that at a time like this sort of terrorism against a certain section of the society will stop. But it continues to go on. Because now you are talking of when you were much younger, you were a teenager, and things that have been happening. And today, they still continue to happen. When is it going to change? See? Because now, you look at maybe little children that are being born today, you need to tell them your story. Now, they look around, okay, some things have changed, but the change is so small compared to what is actually is expected. So when you put all this in context, what do you feel? What do you feel about your being America in this society where you were born and you live?
Well, It has definitely changed since the time of my youth. There's no question it has changed. The problem that we're seeing now with, I'm sure you're familiar with far right wing of the Republican Party. They're just open about the fact of what type of country and what type of leadership they have. The sad events in Buffalo are a direct result of the propaganda that's fed to people who are maybe don't have the ability to discern the information and not take it incorrectly. Whereas some people hear propaganda and they act on it because they truly believe what they are being instructed mentally to think. And this individual was 18 years old. You and I both know at 18 years old, you haven't lived long enough to really understand the concepts of life. So to make the decision to shoot and kill 10 people and injure several others is not something you would come to at 18 years old unless you were indoctrinated through propaganda to believe in a supremacist thought of oppression toward other people. And unfortunately for Black people in the United States, that's not going to change. What is happening is as you get more and more Black people into the middle class, they're less likely to want to carry on the struggle because their lives have improved. And when you ask me about, do I think things are going to change dramatically over the next decade? I don't think so. I think what you're going to see is a continuation of the restrictions of voting in the United States, methods to control access to income, access to business ownership, access to world leadership. I take it back. I don't know if you're familiar with Andrew Young, who was the ambassador to the UN, but he gave a speech around 1978 when he talked about after World War II and Winston Churchill drawing the boundary lines for all the countries in Africa. And part of that rationale was to keep all the countries in Africa in conflict. And I guess the best example would be Nigeria. Nigeria should have been allowed to break up into probably 3 different countries, but yet the boundary lines drew it into one country where it's always in turmoil. And I use Nigeria as an example of what I'm saying about things not changing. I don't have to control you by pointing a gun at your head if I can control the way that you think. And Nigeria, as you're probably aware of, at one time, I think for 30 years, was the 4th largest oil exporter in the world. It is a rich nation, but it's not reflected in the lives of the average Nigerian. And as you relate it to America, it's the same. There are breakthroughs in the larger Black middle class, but yet again, probably 30% of the Black population in the United States lives in poverty. And I don't see a change in that anytime soon.
All right. Now, I found your conversation very interesting for the larger diaspora community. It is very, very important. They are not going to keep the people in chain anymore, but they still manage to keep them in psychological chain. If that is the new frontier of the war, because actually the war that has been fought against African people, I usually say in most of the cases that the biggest of it has been taking place in the mind. If we manage to have a semblance of reality as that, do you think we have the possibility of liberating ourselves because we are no longer in chain? I mean, we are no longer physically in chain, but we are mentally in chain. Do you think we can do something about it? I mean, African, global, African in Africa, and African in the diaspora?
Well, the problem becomes this. As people excel and their lives get better, they lose the energy and lust for battle. And I don't know, I see it in the United States so often that in the cities here, particularly again, these right-wing Republicans in this country, is they will select certain Black people, Black leaders in their groups, and allow them to earn great money, have great exposure, national representation. And if you can siphon off a section of the Black population to follow that lead, and then another section, the middle class section, has some level of frustration, but overall are comfortable with the lives that they live. They're not inclined to fight the war, to fight the battles that are necessary to change the mind of the rank and file, that life can get better for the entire Black population. Uh, One thing I've heard recently is people upset in Africa and the United States about the emergence of China throughout Africa. But the difference that China did, other than what the United States and Britain did, they didn't come in and kill the leaders. They didn't come in and kill the leaders. They didn't limit their access to riches in the country and being able to exalt them themselves. I'm talking about the people of Africa. And when you ask the question, can we change the mindset of the general population to work together to get a better outcome? Anything's possible. But unfortunately, I just think you're going to need a charismatic leader and acceptance throughout the Black world that there has to be a united front for the uplifting of the entire group of people. And we struggle in the United States with it. I don't know the depth in Africa, in the continent of Africa, but in the United States, we truly struggle with it because people will simply take the medicine of a better life over change.
I think that the only way we are going to survive this is when we fight on the same front. But by fight now, I'm not really talking of physical fight, even though sometimes that cannot actually be avoided. Because if you look at many other people that have been able to build themselves, they have done it at any cost necessary. We must be prepared to do that. But the one that we're actually talking about now is about the sensitization of the people. Right there in the United States was a man who grew up. I'm talking of Marcus Garvey, who took the people and told them, let's do this. He was a man. Of course, he didn't do it alone. Without the people that stood by him, I don't know of any man like him in the history that we can ever reflect on about African diaspora. So is it that we are lacking the men with charisma, because you use the word charisma today, or will people just feel it is not necessary to organize themselves? Maybe they are just buying the alternative of, okay, nobody is putting a chain on your hand now, so there is no need. Just take it. Do you think it's a lack of people, or is just because we are having an alternative to freedom?
Well, again, I use Atlanta as an example. You had forerunners to Dr. Martin Luther King in the fashion of W.E. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, who talked about the elevation of Black people in the country. They had two different views, but both of them were helpful. Marcus Garvey came along in between both of them, and his movement was very successful because it uplifted the mental state of Black people. I think that's where Malcolm X had success, in that he helped Black people frame their mindset differently. And Dr. King came in with the mindset of, if we really want to change things within the United States and ultimately the world, you have to learn how to operate in the system. I think the difference, what I speak of, is Dr. King, who turned down millions of dollars, millions, because he was true to the movement. I don't know if you have a leader now that has the strength to turn away from the money, the fame, and the inclusion. Dr. King wasn't about that. He was about the movement. I remember him winning the Nobel Peace Prize. He only took $2,000. He gave all the other money to his organization here in Atlanta. So I don't want to sound like doom and gloom, but I'm just saying, I think you have to have someone who has a true spiritual understanding of success as a person, in that he doesn't need the material satisfaction or accoutrements to really be about a movement. If you have a leader come along like that in the United States, there could be a renaissance, and there could be a re-energizing of the uplifting of the Black population in the United States, and a joining with countries in Africa, say like Malawi. where Malawi is totally changed. They're totally in control of their country. And the country has a booming economy. It's possible, but you have to have leadership that puts forth a message. It doesn't buy into the fact that I have to be materially rewarded and financially rewarded to be about the movement rather than the cause.
All right, this is where I found it a little bit challenging now. The movement of Michael Garvey, then Michael Mies, Martin Luther King. How come when this individual left the scene, the movement sort of have, I don't want to say falling apart, but they didn't continue again? Because I want to believe, I've interviewed a number of people asking them the same question I am tempted to ask you today, which is, have we gotten what we wanted from the movement, from the protest, from the cry on the street that we needed something? Because if we haven't gotten what we wanted, why did we stop the march? What do you want to say about that?
Well, I think part of it is having an individual. I mean, Marcus Garvey, if I remember right, organized the largest group of people to ever purchase something in the United States. And I think he led with the movement to Liberia. And he had a very strong personality. He had a very clear message. And at the time of his strength was Black people in the United States were being horribly mistreated. Obviously, Dr. King and Malcolm X came along at the same time. And I think with the successes of the civil rights movement, and again, doors opening, money flowing, I think people just changed their minds. I give you another example. When you're talking about the movement just dying out, let's take Black Lives Matter here in the United States. It started out as a movement about police brutality and the mistreatment of Black people. But now the leadership of the organization is under national scrutiny because they collected millions of dollars and they spent them personally. And when you do that, you lose the support of your membership because now they don't see you as a leader for change. They see you as a leader of opportunity. And I think that's kind of what happened to the movements in the 70s is a lot of Black leaders, a lot of political elected officials were bought off.
If we were to take on the argument of infiltration into some of these organizations, we will see also there is a hand of the monkey in the soup. Somebody has been fueling the division, and that has been on purpose too. But of course, we're not looking for a war, a world where we are not going to have opposition, where we are not going to have an enemy that want to kill us. In fact, I think the people who are prepared into the future must be those who are ready to defend it at any cost necessary. Not those who are hoping that there will not be enemy. No, the enemy will always be there. So if that is the case, we must be prepared. We must be prepared to stand our ground and be ready also to pay the cost, as it were. Now, look at Africa. We are over 1 billion people. We are not really demented. We are not sick. If we were to organize an army, it will be robust. There will not be lack of people to stand and take us armed to defend ourselves. In terms of technology, okay, Africa as a continent is not the top in the world and is not the most popular. But since technology is also a question of things that can be learned, with the Africans abroad and some of them at home who know how to operate within the realm of technology, the knowledge can also be passed on. And this is a continent that is full of resources. How can we just be handicapped? Looking at all the experts also that we have in the diaspora, professors, engineers, technicians in different fields. Sometimes I find it difficult to understand how we remain in this state of handicap, that we just complain that we cannot do it. Do you see any rational justification of why we should remain handicapped?
there's no justification for remaining handicapped. And when you talk about Africa, the continent of Africa is recognized as the richest continent in the world in terms of mineral rights. Uh, we can go back to the Congo and with Patrice Lumumba, when he won the election and he tried to organize the people of the Congo for the betterment of the people of the Congo. And of course, the United States and France orchestrated a coup and put Mobutu in power. My problem was they put Mobutu in power. He changed the name of the country to Zaire and all that good stuff. But they run him out of the country in 1995. At the point of 1995, when you removed him as your president or dictator, whomever he was, that should have been the interest in uplifting the country and its people. But it doesn't really look like the Congo is any better off now than it was when they forced him out. It seems like you just had people rise up and replace his theology rather than someone rise up and let's work for the betterment of the nation of the Congo and elevate the lives and free the minds of Congolese. So I don't want to be a pessimistic, but if you don't have leaders who come up with a greater cause than their own illumination, it's going to be difficult because people follow people, and they follow leaders, and they follow leaders who they want to be like. And if being like a leader means being rich, if it means having access, if it means having palaces and cars and all that stuff, you and I both know everybody can't have that in the country, top, but everybody can be functional. And I think you have to have a leader that is truly about the people. And I think that's where we struggle, because human beings are still animals and animals still follow leaders.
Animals still follow lead. Maybe we need to learn from other animals on how to better organize a society. All right, now let's talk about the Truthsayer Report. Tell me about it. How did it get started and what are you aiming at?
Okay, it got started because basically conversations like you and I are having, where we recognize the fact that information leads to knowledge and knowledge is power. And I, in my research, and I told you when I graduated a degree in political science here, and I just learned a lot of things that never were reported and people don't know. And it's really sad. So I started to do my podcast for the purposes of providing information, hopefully in an enjoyable format, and not long. My podcasts range 14, 15 minutes. They're long enough to give you valuable information, but they're not too long to lose your attention. And one of which I've enjoyed is I started last year in April. One was called France and the United States, the Brotherhood. And I talk about how the France and the United States became brothers when France supported the American settlers in creating the United States of America. And obviously the United States rescued France twice in World War I and in World War II. They bailed them out when they failed in the building the Panama Canal. And of course, the biggest one is Vietnam. Vietnam was a gold mine for the French. Most of the major rubber companies in the world operated in Vietnam: Goodyear, Bridgestone, Michelin. It was a gold mine. And when the French lost to Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese, Viet Cong, I should say, France asked for the United States help. And we went to war in the Vietnam War, where over 58,000 US soldiers were killed. And I try to point out the fact that you have to understand what drove the war and the willingness of American politicians and industrial leaders to sacrifice 58,000 citizens in order to keep the money flow coming. And again, we don't learn from history if we don't know history, because we had a war in Iraq that lasted 17 years. We had a war in Afghanistan that lasted 20 years. And we never come to the understanding that $3.5 trillion was spent in those two wars. Who got the money? It's the same companies. The industrial war machine got the money at the expense of the common people in the United States. And what politicians here do is just wrap themselves around the flag. And that is the point of the Truthsayer Report, is to provide people with information and an understanding how things are done in order to move the masses.
Thank you so much for that, there, Jeffrey. All right, now, based on your survey of the audience or the people that are listening to your podcast, what can you say about their need? What do you gather around them about their need for re-information today? Do you think they are hungry for re-information, or they're just looking for something to pass away their time? I mean, how serious are we as a people to learn?
Well, I think the majority of my listeners, based on their comments, are eager to learn the knowledge for change. And I give you two quick ones. I don't know how familiar you are with the battle in the United States right now, critical race theory. Critical race theory is the theory that people use propaganda and public policy to control the behavior and movement of certain groups in the country. There's a huge battle going on in this country about not teaching it between kindergarten and the 12th grade, which currently it is not. In my podcast, I bring up the fact that it's not taught at those levels. It's a graduate level course, but the opposition to learning about critical race theory is the masses in this country don't want American history that is negative to be taught. They don't want to learn about, they don't want their children to know about slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, Vietnam. They don't want them to know that. So the opposition to critical race theory in this country has been painted black. Anytime in this country, when you want to put a negative spin on something, you paint it black. So I've had a lot of viewers who've listened to it and grasped the concepts of what I'm saying, which is the methodology is to push us away from learning, and the masses of the majority race for their children to learn, because 50 years of integration, there's a change of the mindset in the country. And this new generation simply doesn't want their children to know the horrors which their parents and grandparents took part in.
Critical race theory.
Yes.
What are we talking about by this? What does it mean? Can you break it down for me?
What critical race theory is, it is the study of the usage of public policy and propaganda to force the masses to operate kind of like cattle, moving them to a different pasture. And Black people have been pushing critical race theory as the reasoning used to keep Black people in oppression. The white parents of the now generation don't want it to be taught in their schools, because they don't want their children and their grandchildren to know how they treated Black people, because it's contrary to the Constitution of the United States of America. And the theory is designed to instruct lawyers how to fight for civil rights cases. And that's why it's called critical race theory, because in critical race theory, the subject matter is showing you propaganda, public policy, and how it directs people. And a lot of people just don't want that knowledge out there.
All right. If this knowledge, if this theory were to be preached to the people, maybe taught in schools and things like that, what is supposed to be the objective, the real objective of critical theory be taught to everybody?
The purpose would be that you would try to remove discriminatory thoughts and actions against people who are not like yourselves. And it's just not related to, say, Black people. It would be related to Asian people, Hispanic people, people who are moved into the gay community, because the point is that all U.S. citizens are equal and have freedoms. And there's no constitutional denial of their human and civil rights. That's the purpose of critical race theory, is to show that people were trying to deny minority groups their equality within the system. And people simply don't want that taught because they don't want to be taught. Let's take South Africa, for example, apartheid. They don't want to teach apartheid to school, to the majority, to the white schools in South Africa. They don't want the white South Africans to know. That's how they had a system of oppression for centuries. Or Britain, which was once the greatest empire in the world, and it dominated countries all over the world, and most of the countries that it dominated were people of color. And they had discriminatory practices to keep the people in check and to keep their power in place. And critical race theory's job is to teach what they did with the purposes of knowledge and not allowing it to happen again.
Those evil that were committed against African American, for example, the Jim Crow law, the Ku Klux Klan, the homicide, the genocide that have been committed against, say, only the African American. Do you think we can still talk about it without referring to race? Do you think we can look at it as a crime against people, not necessarily against race?
No, not in the United States, no.
All right. Can you define for me what is meant by race?
In the United States, race is defined by what is your the color of your skin and your ethnic makeup. So in the United States, obviously you had a majority population, which is either considered Caucasian or white. And then the second largest group now is Hispanic. Hispanic just means you share the same language. Of course, Central America and South America have 30 countries, and they're all called Hispanic. So one of the struggles the Hispanic community is going through in this country is kind of what happened with Black people before the Civil Rights Movement. No matter what your social economic position, you were discriminated based on your color of your skin. But once the Civil Rights Movement and victories were won, Black people could separate themselves socially by social economics. That's what's happening with the Hispanic community. They're no longer identifying so much as Hispanic because now they can separate themselves by social economics. I may be from Mexico, but I am a middle class or wealthy Mexican as opposed to a working class or poor Mexican. And the same is true of Central American countries and South American countries. So to answer your question, they identify race here based mostly on the color of your skin and your ethnicity.
Fine, I like this argument. So let's take it there a little bit also because, your podcast, I talk a lot about truth, and I think that is a deep thought. All right. Now, talking about race, is it possible that we are looking at a social construct here, that we're looking at people as Black and white, that those are the races, or do we have these multiples of races? Because I'm not really able to understand how human beings are classified into races, for example. So I need a bit of understanding there, if you can help me. Do you think it is a social construct, or is there a scientific explanation to races? That is what I want to understand.
Okay, what it is, let's go back to slavery in the United States. Obviously, slaves were people of African descent who could be distinguished by the color of their skin and the texture of their hair. Once this slavery ended in the 1860s, there were Jim Crow laws across the South and in the North that stated if you had one drop of African blood in you, then you were a Negro. It didn't matter, so much what you looked like. But if you ever spoke, well, my great grandmother was Black, or some of those, when you say a social construct, it was defined that you were Black, that the scientific measure was one drop of Black blood made you Black. And as time moved on from slavery to now, it's kind of divides on how you look. And even if you're mixed race or what used to be known as mulatto, um, you're still considered black, and therefore you're considered less than. And politically, that's the case. Socially, that's the case. And from, again, as you mentioned, from a social construct, yeah, because you're going to be denied opportunities based on being identified as part of a minority group. And unfortunately, things have changed. And because of, again, integration of the 1970s and now 50 years of integration, people some people in the country recognize each other as individuals. And interracial dating has skyrocketed, and interracial marriage has skyrocketed in the United States. And there are groups that no longer want to be defined as black or white, but it's mixed race. But that is not a construct in this country that's accepted. You are either black or you're white. You have to pick a team. You can't be Switzerland. And to answer your question, it hasn't changed much. And that's just how it is. And it's difficult for a lot of people, particularly the white side of a family that has merged with a black family and for the first time in their lives see the actual treatment of black people now that they are in association with black people.
All right. I think that argument needs to also be actually be expanded upon, because first, I want it to be established whether or not what we are referring to as race or races is actually scientifically proven.
It's not.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So it means it's actually a social construct. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. If that is a problem, now, how do we get entangled into this social stratification that we must remain there? Because now we identify ourselves based on how somebody wants to be called or want to call us. A good example would be, I did an interview with a historian a couple of days ago relating to the mass shooting in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. Because the guy, the 18-year-old boy who went there and shoot people, I want to believe that the system will refer to him as a white supremacist. And I said, well, I don't want to call him a white supremacy. I want to call him who he is, because he terrorized people. And according to the law, according to the common vocabulary, when you terrorize people, you are a terrorist. But I found out that if you go online, you go to BBC, CNN, all the major news outlets, you will not see him be described as a terrorist. So the question really is, are we limited to how we can describe people based on really what they do, or it's not an intellectual concept? So I don't think most of the things we do should barely be a hypothesis. These things really are there. The people that died, those 10 people really happened. So it is not a theory. The action that took place that day really did happen. There are descriptions for it. We know. That is terror. The guy is a terrorist. If we accept that he is a terrorist, then the argument is completely different now, because as a terrorist, you are not really defending any person. You are against a society. You are against human civilization. You are against a common way of living as human beings. But if we describe you as a racist now, it means we are separating you from one group, we are adding you to another group, which means you are defending a value. But how can we look at all this horror and consider the people operating based on the defense of a value? That is what I'm beginning to find difficult to understand if we classify people based on races. Because now, we want to call ourselves black. Fine. I want to take it to a certain extent. But do we really think, I mean, even among us Africa, do we really think that this color that we are calling ourselves describe us as who we really are? Do you think it is? Mr. Jeffrey, I'm asking you the question. Do you think calling yourself black actually describe who you are?
No, I don't think it describes who you are. I think what it is the easiest form to identify a person. And that's what I'm saying about in America, in a use of identifying people, you can classify them with words, and sometimes those words, as relates to Black people, have negative connotations. Now, as you just said, when you look at the story about Buffalo, and the young man is featured on the BBC, or CNN, or even here Fox News, a very conservative news outlet, he is referred to as a boy, which to me gives indication that somehow he's not responsible for his conduct. He is a terrorist, as you have said. He's no different than how we fear Muslim terrorists in this country, or what they would describe as Middle Eastern terrorists. They don't describe them as boys; they describe them as terrorists. They create horror, trauma for society around them. So I think what you said is right. He should be labeled as a terrorist because that's who he is. He is a domestic terrorist who is based in racist and bigoted thought and action. And when we define people with one word, and if that one word is inclusive to being negative, then psychologically you have a greater advantage over one group of people than another.
Thank you so much for that. Now, another thing I'm really finding very interesting in your podcast, because I've listened to a couple of them before I started to talk to you, and also the conversation I'm having with you, is the fact that it's a feeling that I'm having that I'm bringing forward to you. I'm going to ask you as a question. Is that I think that we can reframe our mind. I think we can change our mind. I think we as a people do have the possibility of re-educating ourselves from the frame somebody has given to us so that we can think differently. And of course, that has some consequences. I know that. Anyway, before we go there, do you think that with all the instruments that we have today, intellectual, artistic, do you think we really can? Do you want to support me that we can change our mind? Please expand on that.
Yeah, I think we can change our minds. I think I give it, like I said, you go back to the 70s and you can see the mindset change of this country. People are not, they don't formulate the same ideas about racial groups today that they had in the 70s. So their minds have changed. They developed, they've matured, they've grown. That's happening in the whole country. As it relates to the Black populace, I think there was more connectivity in the civil rights movement than it is here. But I do think that most Black people do recognize that if Black people change their minds and are more about self-help and individual achievement, then it helps the community. If it helps one community, then it helps several communities. And those communities grow into cities. And those cities grow into states. So changing of the mind and development of the mind, the education process is possible. The only negative I put to it is you have to decide you want better, and you have to decide you want better collectively. And you're never going to get 100%. But like I said, during the civil rights movement, you didn't have 100% Black participation in the movement. You probably had about 75%. But look what you gained when you had somewhat of a united front in a common struggle with a social construct that no matter what I do socially, economically, I'm denied opportunity based on how I'm defined as a human being. So I know I'm going a long way with it, but I don't know if you listened to my last podcast, California named for a Black queen.
I did.
My point of that was the wealthiest state and the most popular state in the United States of America is named after a Black female, a Black queen. So you can have positive, reinforced imagery of Black people and Black success. And through Black success, the whole populace rises. And that's what I'm saying to you. Unfortunately, we tend, as human beings, we tend to follow leaders, as opposed to all of us raising ourselves up individually. We follow individuals who instruct us to rise. Example would be ministers or preachers. I don't know how strong they are in Africa, but in America, they wield a lot of power. And if they're not about the business of true development and success of their congregations, their communities, but they're more about self-grandization, I believe that's how you say it, their own personal glorification, their own economic growth, their illumination within the society. If that's their aims, and they're not really there promoting the best for the people. And I know what you're trying to say about us collectively, working collectively, in order that the collective, the commonwealth, would improve. And I'm struggling with the concept of us working collectively for the commonwealth.
You think it's not going to be a possibility?
Not in the United States, because the United States is so so capitalist. Maybe it's a possibility in Africa, because a lot of the countries in Africa are not necessarily driven capitalists and individualists. As in the United States, exactly what it is. It's all built on the British model of individual property rights, individual success, individual freedoms and rights. Whereas a lot of countries in Africa are still about the collective.
Where that would need to be explained. And my brother, what you are going through in the United States is what we are going through in Africa is the same, basically the same identical thing. What I think the Europe, because now when we are talking of the United States, I usually say this and I want to repeat it again. We're not looking at people other than the European. These are European that we are dealing with. And the other people on the other end as Africans. So let's forget about this color thing. We're not looking at some black babies jumping down from the sky. We are looking at people that have been reported for several thousands of years. These are the people that are also having an encounter today in the United States. They are Europeans and Africans. So we also know ourselves. I think by the time we begin to take the argument to this level, then we can be looking for a way to find a lasting solution. In that, I want to repeat again, the kind of world we are hoping for is not where you are not going to have enemy. There are always going to be the people who will be creating division, who will be creating enmity among the groups so that they cannot work or collaborate among themselves. This is happening in the United States. It's happening all across, here in Europe and also in Africa. Because it is sophisticated, the operation that is in place. But despite this, because the chain is not on our hands, I don't know if you can suggest some strategy to the people that are listening to us or how to build trust on ourselves again. Because I say this often, no one is coming to save us. No one is coming from anywhere. We are only going to save ourselves or we are going to perish. There is no one coming to save us.
You're absolutely right. Let me give an example of, I think, what you're talking about, when I'm talking about the collective, the commonwealth. I mentioned to you, Atlanta has the busiest airport in the world. It's been under the control of Black leadership for 50 years. The majority of the millionaires up until, I would say, probably 1990, who were created in the city of Atlanta, were created through contracts at the airport. The Atlanta airport is constantly going through renovation and construction. And you're talking billions of dollars. But that money lies in the hands of Black people. And one of the negatives that the state of Georgia, who is white controlled, despises about Atlanta is the Atlanta airport is the largest employer in the southeastern United States. It is the largest revenue generator in the Southeast, and it is under control of Black people who are getting other Black people jobs and getting them contracts. and it is not well received. So if it's not well received by the majority, and then you have jealousy within the Black community of the success of the contractors at the airport, on one hand, you're winning, and then on the other hand, you're losing. And that's my struggle globally for the Black man or the Black people, is that we have to grow up and mature and look at the commonality and the commonwealth of the entire group. Because like I said, Nigeria, everybody in Nigeria should be living good. Everybody in the Congo should be living good. The wealth and the power should not lie in the hands of 5 or 10% of the citizenry. And you don't have a white man to blame.
I like that. I like that, my brother. I like that very much. That at a point, we are going to take responsibility. At a point, we as a people are going to take responsibility. As long as there is no physical chain on our neck, on our leg, on our hands, we are going to take responsibility at a certain point. Do you think, for example, that maybe if we start training people about entrepreneur within the African community, by that I mean both in diaspora and at home, that things could change? Because there is an idea that I used to have. I am actually deviating from it now. In that I used to sort of be very vocal, voicing out against the government, that the government is not doing this, is not doing that. Yes, the government have a lot to do for the people. But now I'm changing from that. The people need to do for themselves. So do you think maybe some individual who know, start passing on the knowledge to the people, we might have a different Africa, a different Africans, wherever we might be? Because what is happening in Africa is also in Europe. It's also happening here. Because, people are very complex animals in that it is difficult for you to just change overnight. If you are coming from Nigeria or coming from Congo, you are in US or in Italy, you don't just change to become like Italian or change to become like the people in the US automatically. It takes a lot of time. So do you think maybe by giving people the right knowledge about entrepreneur, of being self-reliant, of networking and then collaborating among themselves, having trust, because we have millions of people, even in the diaspora. I'm trying to look for hope. I'm trying to look for strategy that we can succeed. What do you see there?
I see it if you can have a group of like-minded people. I don't think you're going to have it in a country, but let's say a community. You're in Italy. I had a cousin got married in Venice about 2 years ago. Let's say you take a community in Italy, and in that small community, the shopkeepers, the school, the villages where the people live, they're in communication and organization with one another for the education of the children, for the safety of the community, for the public works for the community, for the economic growth of the community. And let's say that community is a community of 5,000 people. They can collectively work for the commonwealth, the common good, and everybody can rise just like the tide in the ocean. All the ships rise when the tide comes in. I think you can do it on that scale. And as they say, I guess the proverb is, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a community to raise a people. And it has to start in a small collective where the people are on a common mission for the development of their community, which means every individual in that community will be a profiteer of the success of the community.
Now, for people who want to connect with you, who want to know more about the Truthsayer podcast, who want to follow you, or if you have a business there, you have something that you are selling, how can they reach you? Use these few seconds to promote yourself.
Well, I would say go to the Truthsayer Report. It's on iTunes, Apple. It's on all of the major podcast networks. And what I'm going to start doing is featuring local businesses as well as myself. But my point is, I want everybody to come to the Truthsayer Report, listen to the podcast, and have information that will help better you in your endeavors. Because I think if you realize you're descendant of a black queen, then the way you view yourself will be totally different.
Thank you so much for that. Now, what would be your last statement here, considering the fact that the conclusion is about the fact that the people have the power, the people have the possibility of changing. If we can do something for ourselves, then we can change our situation. So what would be your final statement to conclude it?
To conclude it, I would say the Truthsayer Report is about empowering people with knowledge in order that they can better understand the world that they live in. And I always like to use the quote by Joseph Stalin. His quote was, the masses, oh, what jackasses. And his point was, if I control the information I give you, I can control the way that you think. So my desire is to provide you with necessary information and knowledge that will help better drive your life.
Mr. Jeffrey Hawkins, the host of the Truthsayer Podcast, thank you so much for the sharing today. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, and you take care.
You too. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.